Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 289 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. In this week's podcast, I'm joined by Luke Hutchinson from Northumberland Honey to talk about their mead, honey, and of course, queen rearing. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. Today's podcast is sponsored in part by Healthy Bees, Heavy Hives, a new book on beekeeping today with a focus on helping you maximise your yields and, hopefully, increasing profitability in beekeeping, featuring clear diagrams and beautiful photographs that complement a relaxed and humorous writing style which is both enjoyable and informative to read. Available now at Northern Bee Books, Amazon and all good bookstores both online and in your high street. You'll find links in today's podcast notes. Before we get started today, make sure to listen right to the end of the interview where Luke offers up a fantastic prize for answering a very simple question. Don't forget to check out his website www.northumberlandhoney.co.uk. So let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm delighted to say that, yet again, like swarms in spring, my interviews don't happen in ones, they happen in twos and threes and fours. And I've managed to drag Luke Hutchinson from Northumberland Honey along to have a chat about the operation that he's got up in Northumberland and all about his beekeeping. And so, without me wittering on too long, Luke, good morning. It's great to see you.
Good morning, Stuart. Good to see you too.
For everyone listening, you will know that on a regular basis, well, fairly regular basis, I've been buying queens from Luke. And I have to say they've been really successful, not just because I've got Luke on the podcast, but we've had some really good successes over the last couple of years with them. And so I wanted really to have a chat with Luke to talk a little bit about his business and how really he got started and how it's developed and try and find a little bit more out about the queen rearing that he's involved in now. So, Luke, the question is, how on earth did you get started in beekeeping? How long have you been doing it for? And at what point did you decide, hang on a second, I want to make a career out of this?
So, yeah, well, thanks for the compliments about the queens first off, Stuart. That's really kind. It's, queens are a very dynamic matrix, shall we say. So it's really good for us to hear, some really nice feedback about them. In terms of the beekeeping, well, that kind of goes back to my dad keeping bees pre-Varroa. And so I was about 8-10 years old. And my dad ended up stopping keeping bees when Varroa came because he was very much a beekeeper that was, look in the hive twice a year, pull the honey off, and that's all you did. And so we had these empty hives, and my dad taught me a little bit, but there was a local commercial beekeeper who had about 100 colonies, and he sort of took me under his wing and showed me his operation and started off with his, giving me a first nuke, really, and it didn't go very well. To start with, which is par for the course, and we've still been learning ever since. So I've been probably keeping bees now, I just worked it out, about 25 years. And from school, I went and spent some time doing work experience at the National Bee Unit. I spent 2 summers there. And that really got me hooked on it. And it was just really from a hobby perspective, really. There wasn't actually a thought at the time of it being commercial or anything. It was just completely as a hobby. And fast forward quite a few years and a degree later and meeting Susie, various things happened. I was studying, I trained and qualified as a dentist. And I'd done a lot of different qualifications. I'd worked in oral and maxillofacial surgery. That was my sort of intended career pathway. I was teaching it as well at the hospital, so got quite far along and ended up with carpal tunnel, which is a condition which makes your fingertips go numb, basically, and reduces grip strength. And that was in both hands. I ended up having a failed surgery in my right hand and basically told that there wasn't anything that they could do. At which point, we myself and Susie, we had about 40 colonies of bees. It was kind of just a bit of
Okay.
an overgrown hobby, really. And it was really at that point that I was like, my God, we're going to have to do something. And it was a bit like a cliff edge, really. It had to do or die, really. At that point, it was all sort of it dragged on for ages. And where I'm at now, actually, I've seen different surgeons, and it's years down the line, and my hand's a lot better. Which is a great thing. But
Great.
I'm now about 7 years out of my previous career, so it's quite it's a difficult one, really, with the career and how things have gone, and you end up basically getting here not through a direct choice, but just by the fact of a series of events that happen. So that's really what it is, and I think to make a full-time career out of bee farming and have that as a conscious decision that you want to do is a very interesting mindset, because it really, you've got to be exceedingly brave to do that right from the off. I can't imagine anybody really in the absolute right mind that would just decide that they wanted to make a living out of bees, creatures that try to die all of the time in a market that's very variable. So it's it's a difficult one, but we've kind of got to this point not through absolute choice but necessity, and it just so happens that we like keeping bees.
Yeah, so I guess a lot of people, I mean, that's a really interesting pathway to your current position, Luke, which
Mhm.
we've not shared before. I didn't
Right.
realize that.
I don't tend to tell too many people about it, Stuart, because it's quite it's a complex thing, and we
Absolutely.
get asked it all the time, and it takes a bit of time to explain it.
Yeah, sure. So I guess a lot of people will, in the beekeeping world, will know of Northumberland honey predominantly for the mead that you produce.
Yeah.
And whenever I've seen you at shows, it's been the mead that's kind of been
Mhm.
on the stand and featured quite heavily. So
Yeah.
how did you get into the mead production, and what else are you doing alongside that in your business?
Yeah, so the mead was interesting, and it kind of links in, with what I've just told you about how we set up, because you would automatically think that something like a sparkling champagne method mead would be a diversified product that you decide to do some years down the line. And in actual fact, that was the first thing that was set up, and that was really Susie, who did a PhD in molecular nutrition. She, had an interest in that side of things, and something different. It wasn't really about growing a big bee farm. And with mead, you can actually start exceedingly small with
Right.
just a handful of colonies, and you don't need a great deal of honey compared to if you're selling honey by the jar or in bulk. So we started with it. We had a passion for champagne, and we spent a couple of summers in Champagne and over on the west coast of America, where mead is quite a much bigger thing than it is in the UK. And decided that we wanted to create something unique, something different, and ultimately something that we could drink. Because if it all goes wrong, we've got several thousand bottles of the stuff that we might have to drink. So we
But
focused on making stuff that we like first and foremost.
to be fair, you've won quite a number of awards with your mead, and it does appear to be a very successful part of your business now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we've won a gold, silver, and bronze at the Mesa Cup in America, which is the world's largest mead competition. So that's quite a real good pat on the back. Again, we're not particularly very good at telling people about all of these things, but it's just we put them in mainly for the feedback, and then we get that, and we're like, wow, this is brilliant. And equally at the European Mead Makers, they call it the Mead Madness Cup, we've had a gold and a silver from there. So we focused on the champagne method because it's what we've got an interest in. But more recently, we've developed a distilled mead, and that was in part thanks to Mick Jordan over at Nine Maidens Mead, because they used to produce one. Well, they did one, I think, as a small batch run, called it Guires. And we had a bottle of that, and we're like, this is great. And there wasn't any other distilled mead that we could find commercially, so we were like, right, well, we need to crack on and do one, and that's been really well received. And then we do honey beer, which we've teamed up with a brewery who's just down the road from us, who take our heather honey to produce that, and that's quite a nice thing in that we're selling it, but they're also selling it. So it's quite
Fantastic.
it's a good working relationship. But at the end of the day, it's great and it's fun, but it's quite costly to do all of these things,
Yeah.
and it won't make you a millionaire. And it's a lot of hard work. Just where it ends up going in 10 or 20 years' time will be interesting to see. But a lot of people sort of, I think that mead will be the next craft beer or a massive thing. Our view on it is slightly different, and I think it's mainly because of honey as the key ingredient. It's very expensive. It's a difficult thing to produce, and quality takes time, and all of these things are quite expensive. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of matrix to sort of fit together with.
Sure, sure. On the subject of honey, do you have to input an awful lot of your own honey into the mead making? I mean, in terms of production, do you mind sharing kind of the numbers of like colonies and honey you produce and how much of that goes into the mead?
Yeah, so it's quite straightforward in a way. I mean, in terms of our growth, COVID has been helpful in that it knocked a lot of mead sales on the head. So we scaled back production a lot. And so we haven't had to buy any honey in for mead production or honey. It's all our own stuff that we're producing. So we like to get up to, we were almost at 10 tons of honey this year. And that's a figure that we'd like to sort of see grow a little bit. And it's just comfortable with what we're selling and what we're making. And perhaps, a ton or two of that might go towards mead. And then the rest is either sold in bulk and jars. And we find that we can sell all of the honey that we produce. And so when I genuinely tell people when they're starting out, if it was me doing it again, to be quite honest with you, I would focus on an operation that has very few costs and just sell bulk honey. And it's a very strange opinion, perhaps, from somebody that's doing so many different products and diversified. And it's not to put people off doing what we're doing. It's just that I know how difficult it all is. And actually, the profit, if you like, would be not too dissimilar if we were just selling bulk honey from a much smaller premises and we cut all our costs out. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
No, that's fine. And in terms of 10 tons of honey from what number of production units?
Around about 200 last year that were actually just producing honey. We've got about 250 colonies. A good number of those are put into cell building, and then we've got nukes on top of that. And then mating nukes, we keep about 700 mating nukes. So it's across that.
So that's going to keep you quite busy, which brings me on to the next question. You can't possibly do this all by yourself. So
with Superman, Stuart.
do you have, obviously Susie is an integral part of the operation, but do you have other people that come in and help either
absolutely. Susie, to be fair, does about the work of 5 people. She's a force to be reckoned with. And I think that does, she works extremely hard. So we have Liana, who is what we call her our production manager. And she does a few days a week, sometimes more. And she's now really overseeing all of the honey production, jarring, labeling, putting orders together. We do a bit online, so she's in charge of doing that in the morning and answering the phone. So often people will ring us up and Leanna will answer rather than me or Susie, but often if you ring the mobile you'll get me or Susie, so it just depends on the time of year really. Then we have a couple of friends who've developed that come over on holiday, as it were, from New Zealand, who helped us last year for a couple of weeks with instrumental insemination. So obviously I do a lot of that with the queen breeding side of it, but at key points in the year it's helpful for somebody just to come in and really get the numbers up. And then we've got another production assistant starting soon. I mean, generally, so the thing with staff is that they change. We've never really had a very stable number of staff. We sort of fluctuate 3 or 4, but people certainly that come into it just loving honey, say, think that we sit in a lay-by with a straw hat on selling honey all day. And then they come in and they're like, wow, there's a lot of cleaning to do here. There's a lot of buckets to wash.
Yeah.
And, it's really hard work, the production side of it. Our longest serving member of staff probably has been about 3-4 years. And so it's just managing that really with staffing and turnover.
Do you think it's because of the seasonality of our workload that you struggle with the staffing, or is it?
I think here it's just because it's so much hard work. I think it really is, and we are seasonal in some respect, and it just does go mental mad in the middle of summer. But I think it's just not really what people generally expect, and the problem is a lot of things really what people actually perceive beekeeping to be and honey production. And you do see a lot of this on social media where it's all very, very, very romanticized, and actually it's farming. really. And it's so much closer to that than anything else. You know, if somebody comes in for an interview to me for a beekeeping role, say, and they start off by saying, well, I absolutely love bees, I have a real passion for pollinators and things, I'm like, that is all really well and good, interest that we share too. However, what I really want to hear is that they love hard work, that they're strong as an ox, can lift the box, and don't mind working in extreme heat and conditions in a bee suit.
Yeah, and getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and working through till 10 o'clock at night at the peak of the season.
Yeah, and getting the resilience to be stung at the same time occasionally.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, good luck with your staff recruitment going forward. In terms of the queen rearing, if we can move on to that side of the business, which is kind of my own personal interest in your business. In terms of numbers, what are you producing through the season? And just tell us a little bit about all of that, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Sure. So the Queen's very interesting. I mean, where this all sort of stemmed from was COVID, really, because obviously we saw a big drop in sales with Mead, and we had an interest in the queen rearing. You know, I'd done an instrumental insemination course. We were producing all our own queens, and we thought, right, well, let's see if we can expand on this a little bit. And we've gone from there to last year. We produced just over 2,000 queens open mated. Then instrumental inseminated queens just over 200. And so it's grown quite a lot in a few years. But our main focus is that breeding side of it, really. So you get queen rearers who will just rear queens up from some other breeding stock usually, and then you get people that rear queens and also breed them. So we like to think that we fit more neatly into the breeding category, really, where we're actually trying to develop lines and improve the bees. And so it takes a lot of work, and that really does put more seasonal pressure on the business. And so we do have people that come in and help, and just even unskilled people, if you like, that can just help us with carrying stuff and moving things, putting apodias together. And really having friends in New Zealand has really helped, because Gary, he comes from a background of producing 12,000 queens a year, and so when he comes to ours, it's kind of a bit of playtime, really. And just we've got a board now where all of the grafting weeks are mapped out, and he's like, why are you grafting on this day? That means that you have to work on a Sunday, when and you're like, I didn't really think of that before. And so it's really working with people has really helped us to actually develop our systems into a really efficient system, really, to be fair now.
Fantastic. No, that's great. And for those beginner beekeepers that are listening, can you just explain the process that you go through in producing queens, let's say from open mating, which is probably where most people will be producing their own queens? Yeah,
so the open mating is just basically natural mating. So the queen flies out of hive, mates with 18, 20 drones, hopefully, or however many are available. So how we get to that point is we select the breeder queen, and then we graft from that queen. We take a day-old larvae, graft it. We use the NICOT system, but not as in getting the queen to lay the egg in it, which you can do. You can get a kit to do that, but we found it, to be fair, nearly as unreliable as grafting, because all sorts of variables I won't go into. But we graft the day-old larvae, and then that goes into a cell builder. We prefer to use a queen right cell builder, just because that tends to work best for us. And actually, it's a lot easier to manage than just going through lots of queenless colonies and making sure that you don't get virgins emerging and all sorts. So our bees just respond better to a queen right setup. Once they are sealed, the cells, we then transfer them to an incubator, at which point, when we're stocking apodias, we tend to run virgins in, and then a day old, and then following that we'll use cells to restock once we've pulled the queens. But we've actually done, Anna, who is our bee farming apprentice, as part of her final project, we did a study over 2 years on, literally, we introduced just virgins on 1 year, the whole time, no cells at all. And then the next year, we just introduced cells. And it was really interesting that there was absolutely near as damn it no difference between the two in our hands. But I know people have their own opinions on it. But the cells are definitely a lot quicker.
Just on that point, Luke, whenever we've had that panicky moment that I'm sure so many beekeepers have, when you open up a hive and you find there's virgin queens popping out of queen cells all over the place. Yeah. We've always found that grabbing that virgin queen carefully and running them into a queenless nuke of some sort has worked pretty much every single time. I find introducing a virgin queen into a queenless nuke. Just so simple, really.
Yeah.
Can I just take you back to your queen right cell builder setup?
Yeah.
So I've in the past used a cloak board method,
Yeah.
which, whilst it works well, is a bit of a weightlifting job.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, I think all systems work well so long as the weather and everything's on board. I mean, when Gary was here, for example, last year, we didn't use cloak boards at all.
Yeah.
And we had quite a cold spring, a real struggle getting things going. And, he convinced us to use some cloak boards. So we do have experience of that method as well.
Yeah.
And it's really sort of fiddly, a lot of things to move around and change. Whereas a queen right system, you just have a very strong double brood colony. In the bottom box, you've got your queen. You just make sure that queen has, enough space in the bottom to keep laying, and then she'll not think about swarming.
Right.
And then a queen excluder, the next box up, you want some open larvae, open brood, and you want some emerging brood as well, where you're getting the nurse bees to come in, and a frame of pollen, really. And if it's really nice and bubbling and boiling strong, you'll do really well with it. It's such a simple system, and it really does work if it's if you've got good weather.
Yeah.
And I think if you're struggling with queen rearing, often it is down to the conditions and whether the bees have got access to pollen, whether they're flying, whether it's cold enough, what the nighttime temperatures are. If you're grafting and you have a big frame of cells, and then you go in and you've only got 2 or 3, and all of those cells are in the middle of the frame, the bees have actually clustered away from those outer cells at night, and then not regardless of what you're going to do, you are never going to get those end ones to take. So you've got to have a really, really strong colony, whichever system you use, really.
And I guess we're using a kind of supersedure trait within the colony in that respect, rather than kind of swarm cells or any emergency cells. It's trying to encourage them to produce a supersedure.
Yeah, they do. I think they just tend to take a little bit more time and thought over them, really, rather than trying to rush them.
Yeah.
And we've just always had good results with that. I mean, who knows with beekeeping, is a cell that's produced under a supersedure impulse going to create a queen that is more prone to supersedure rather than swarming? I don't know. There's a lot of mystical, magical stuff that goes on with bees.
I think that's probably a couple of podcasts in its own right, isn't it? Discussing the different kind of queen cell production, supersedure, emergency, or swarm. Now, you mentioned instrumental insemination. How's that going, and why are you doing it, and what results have you had?
So the reason why we're doing it is from a breeding perspective, so that we can actually, you get these really good queens that happen, and you want to sort of preserve those genetics. So it just gives us a controlled and measured way of doing that, and it's a really useful tool. We're getting on well with it. We've got two stations that we run from. So generally we either have 2 people doing it at a time, or we have one that's for gathering the drone semen, and then we can move on to the other one that's set up ready to inseminate the queens. Generally, at the moment, we do about 10 to 15 queens a day when we're doing it. So it's not like huge numbers on a daily basis, but it's good enough for us, because I think then if we can get up to 200, II queens, and then we can select out of those, 1 or 2 that are ones we want to take forward, then that's really quite good, and we can then see where the drones have come from, and we can map that out and continue to breed. Probably one of the biggest successes, because we do talk to other beekeepers. Beekeepers can be quite solitary people, but we actually do talk to beekeepers and bee farmers. And, there's a lot of people that import queens. And, when you actually look at it, you're like, well, actually, all of the genetic material is already here. People have been doing this for years. We are where we are. It's 50, 60 years down the line of many, many imports. And people somehow just feel that the best bees will always be imported from countries producing loads of queens, which is fine. But, we do have a lot of genetics here that we also need to sort of look at. And if we can produce, really good stock in the UK, that's what we should be doing. So the point I'm getting at there is we've worked with a few other bee farmers and beekeepers who who've got some really good stock of varying different lines, and say, I've got this breeder queen that's 3 or 4 years old. She's on her knees, but don't want to squash her. Can you do anything? And, then we've taken that queen, got some virgins off her, and then inseminated her with some of our drones. And then we've got a breeder queen effectively for that person. Yeah. And then they're like, right, well, this is fantastic. So it's more of that is what we need to really be doing, because then we're helping people get breeder queens, and for a lot cheaper than they would otherwise be paying, really.
Sure. Now, obviously, you're selling your open-mated queens,
Mhm.
and they're available on your website. And in terms of the instrumental inseminated queens, are they
Yeah,
available for?
they're on there as well. And at the moment, it's just a case of choosing a type as a dark one or a buckfast one, because we can sort of pick lines out and things, but
Yeah,
at the end of the day, even with an instrumentally inseminated queen, buying any queen is a bit like buying a lottery ticket. I do like that phrase, really.
yeah,
Buying one, you may hit lucky and it may be absolutely amazing and trouble free and exactly everything that you want. But equally, it might not be. So, you could end up with 100% success or 100% failure with it. You just do not know.
yeah.
So, with buying any queens, having more queens gives you a better chance of getting exactly what you want.
Sure.
And even with an instrumentally inseminated queen, they're good. And if they're really well looked after and everything's gone absolutely perfectly in their whole process that they've been through, they will last equally as long, if not longer, than an open mated queen. We know exactly how much drone semen that queen has had for a start, so the mating's fine, but they are still susceptible to everything else that an open mated queen is.
Yeah.
Getting squashed on a frame, for example,
Yeah,
or something.
absolutely.
So,
For anyone just going back to the queen production, there's
mhm,
a lot of beekeepers out there that are looking forward to producing their own queens this season.
mhm.
What would you say would be maybe the biggest mistake that beginner beekeepers make that causes them to struggle when they're trying to get the type of queen that they want from their own stock in terms
Mhm.
of temperament or swarminess, that kind of thing? Is there something that we do as beginner beekeepers that are always going to
Yeah.
cause us to run into problems?
Yeah, I mean, by default, in that situation where you don't have a lot of colonies to go from, you are limited by the drone availability that is there, and the drones are equally, if not more important than the queens. So that's first off. So whether it's achievable, what you're setting out to do, but I think if you set out and have realistic aims, that's the main thing, really, because if your aims are lower than your expectations, then you'll be happier. If you
Yeah,
have exceedingly high expectations just from one queen, it's difficult. It depends on the system as well that you're using. If it's going to be that you are very new to it and you want to just split a colony, so say a colony starts raising cells, starting to want to swarm, and you just split that and then let it raise its own cell, you are by default selecting from a swarmy stock and a
yeah,
swarmy colony. So you will then further down the line expect these bees to be swarmy. But perhaps, as a new beekeeper, that's all you've got to work. If you don't mind that, then, hey presto, you've got a mated queen laying and you're happy. And then beekeeping is full of mistakes, really. And a wise man once told me it's not about the number of mistakes that you make, it's the number of mistakes you repeat that are the important thing.
yeah.
So, learning really is really important from it, and sort of analysing what you've done.
And I guess, again, from a beginner's perspective, they are naturally, as you say, going to be producing maybe a lower number of queens than
Mhm.
somebody that's got maybe 40 or 50 colonies and can select from a larger base number of colonies. So you do tend to get what you get from an artificial swarm, for instance, or
Yeah.
from just splitting colonies into smaller numbers of nukes and raising queens from those. Just going back to the Mead, and it's
Mhm.
something I did forget. I guess that, well, it's like the queens as well. It's all going to be on your website for sale if people want to get it.
Absolutely, Stuart. Yeah, and generally we do free shipping opportunities as well across the website on everything. It's just a little bit more straightforward. That's slightly different with the Queens. You can do the free shipping, but we always suggest special delivery with the Queens because that is a guaranteed and insured service. So
Yeah.
if the Royal Mail mess up, then we can easily get a refund from them and get a new queen sent out. So for £7.50 or whatever for special
Yeah.
delivery, I'd always recommend that.
In my experience, it's absolutely the right thing to do because
Mm.
you want that queen to arrive in tip-top condition and
Yeah.
get her into your queenless colony or nuke as early as possible. So
Yeah.
it's a false
It,
economy to go for.
and it also helps us because it means that we've got some stick to beat the Royal Mail with
Yeah,
when it
yeah,
comes to it.
sure, sure. Finally, before I come on to the little bonus bit at the end,
Yeah.
what's your top tip for a successful start in the spring for this season? Because I know people struggle sometimes coming through the winter and into the spring. But what would be your one top tip to get beginner beekeepers fired up and having a successful spring?
Yeah. Okay. So, spring in my mind, always. I mean, the difficulty is I think spring starts in June the previous year. So, touching on that, really, if you do have already got bees, and what happens in the previous summer is absolutely paramount important with swarming. You've only got so many brood cycles to go through. Always think about brood cycles, number of bees. If you've got a solid frame of brood, that's going to equate to 3 frames of bees. That is always in my mind. How is this colony expanding, or is it contracting? And if it's contracting, there's something wrong. And so if you just bear that one thing in its own mind, the number of bees that you are expecting over a certain amount of time, with the worker bee taking 21 days from an egg, you've got a very good idea of how big your colony is going to be. You've got to keep an eye on the weather, on stores. But if it goes wrong, then starting again in June, July even is not a problem. You just are then making sure that those bees are in tip-top condition and making sure that the varroa is absolutely really well dealt with, and that you've got a good feed going in autumn and be fairly trouble-free, really.
Cool. Thank you for that. Luke, it's been great having you on the podcast today. Now, we've been talking about offering up a little prize to our podcast listeners, and I've come up with a question that I think will get people searching around on your website. And I'll put all of the details in the podcast notes for everybody, so you won't have to go searching too far. So on Luke's website, the Northumberland Honey website, there's a section somewhere where Luke describes the distance from the Northumberland Honey meadery to Hadrian's Wall. And if you go onto his website, have a look around, you will find how Luke describes the distance from his Northumberland Honey meadery to Hadrian's Wall. And Luke's going to very kindly set up a page on his website where you will be able to go submit your answer and have a look at the fabulous prizes that he's going to put up for you to win. And this will be for both those people listening on Patreon and also publicly. So there'll be an end date that will allow everybody to take part. But if you're listening to this in 2025, you're probably too late. So don't try and enter the competition if you're listening to this a couple of years late. But all of the details will be on Luke's website and in the podcast notes. That's www.northumberlandhoney.co.uk. And we'll have a good look at what comes through and see eventually who becomes our winner. Luke, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me, Stuart.
I look forward to seeing you at the Beekeeping Show.
Yeah, well, we will see you then.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget to check out my website, www.norfolk-honey.co.uk, and also Luke's website, www.northumberlandhoney.co.uk. And for my latest videos and podcasts with more updates, tips and techniques, it's the same Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey. And remember, I'm Stewart Spinks, and that was Beekeeping Short and Sweet.